Looks like the flow of people joining the room has calmed down, so I'll get us started. Welcome and thank you for tuning into Mass LOMAP's webinar for busy lawyers. These webinars are bring you practical information in just 20 to 30 minutes. By practical, we mean that you can implement what you learn here in your practice immediately. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Robert Plotkin. Robert is a patent attorney specializing in software patents at the law firm of Blueshift IP. He's also the founder of Technology for Mindfulness, where he helps people to be more focused, productive, creative, and happy using the technology. He has been in private practice for over 20 years and enjoys sharing with other lawyers the strategies he has learned for leveraging technology to increase productivity and minimize stress. Before I turn it over to Robert, I'd like to let you know that we will have time at the end to take questions from attendees. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and I will relay those to Robert at the end. Robert, please take it away.
Okay, Anna, thanks so much for having me. Welcome, everybody. As Anna said, I am a patent lawyer. I've been in private practice for over 20, coming up on 25 years. I've been using email all that time. Interestingly, when I started in the mid-90s was just when email was on the cusp of beginning to make its way into law firms in a widespread way. And so I've seen the transition from non-email to email just dominating our lives and our days. And so what I hope to convey to you today and to help you with is to learn some really practical strategies for, as I said in the title, taming your email inbox, taking control over email so that you can spend more of your time doing your real legal work and just living your life and not just fighting your email inbox. As Anna said, post questions in the chat. And I always do like when I start a webinar to ask people, maybe the easiest way is if you cannot, if you can hear me, can you like virtually raise your hand in the Zoom if you know how to do that? I'll just take a peek. Okay, great. People can hear me. I've started webinars where people cannot hear me, and so I've learned that lesson. So we're going to start out just a brief overview. The title of this slide is Email, Miracle, and Curse, because email is an amazing thing. It enables us to communicate with people over any distance instantly. I'm sure everyone here remembers writing paper letters, kind of a thing of the past that take days or longer to reach people. I mean, email can be a really amazing thing if you manage it well. But the curse of email is that it can take up all of your time. It can take up an infinite amount of time. It can distract you. It can interrupt you. And particularly as lawyers, we need to be able to engage in that deep thought to analyze facts and the law and really get immersed in the work that we're doing. And email can be the antithesis of that by constantly distracting us and breaking up our time throughout the day. So I want to start with just a short story to illustrate this. When I started practicing, again, around 96 or so, there was a more senior lawyer who told me about a lawyer he knew who had been practicing law from, I think, around the 1930s to the 1960s. And this person, even by the time he stopped practicing in maybe the mid-60s or so, refused to have a telephone in his office. If any client wanted to call him, they'd have to call the law firm and they'd reach the receptionist or his assistant. They could not reach him by phone. He would not speak to clients by phone. He would only speak to clients by scheduled appointment in the office. And then he would only give advice to clients in a written letter after having duly considered what they had spoken about in the meeting and all the other information they had given him. So I'm just going to stress this because it may sound hard to believe or accept. If a client came in and met with him in the office and told them about their situation, he would not advise them on the spot. He felt it was necessary to take that time to consider everything, look at the law, look at the facts, and not be rash, let's say, in giving advice on the spot. How far we have come. right? To clients demanding, expecting us to respond to them instantly by email and text and telephone without any notice throughout the day, after the day, on the weekend. But there's something in that story I like to hold on to as a goal, even though it may not be truly possible. That's the goal I have in mind when I try to move my practice in that direction, even if I can't get there. I want to do whatever I can within my limited power to be able to be in a position where I can be more reflective when I advise clients, not reactive, not speaking too quickly and then regretting it or making a mistake or having to follow up, and all causing stress and not being in the best service of the client or of us. So that might be something to think about as a model. Even if it's not possible to attain, I find it a good model to think about. So although we can't turn back the clock, we can achieve some real concrete benefits to gain more of the advantages of email and reduce or minimize the disadvantages, even if we can't eliminate them. Let's give a quick overview of the topics. Now, you may hear me going quickly. It's because I want to be respectful of your time. This is a series of webinars for busy lawyers. I should be able to get through the main presentation in about 20 to 25 minutes. For those of you who need to leave at the 30-minute mark, I'm glad to stay past 30 minutes for more questions and answers. And as Anna said, post your answers into the chat, and I believe Anna will then be notifying me if people have questions. So the first topic I'll address is low-hanging fruit. I call email triage. Some really simple things you could do today pretty easily to make some big productivity gains. You get the most bang for your buck from some of these initial quick steps if you're not already doing them. And then I'm going to talk about time blocking email, which is basically various ways to set aside dedicated time to respond to email instead of having it be something you're doing continuously. Batching email may sound similar, but this is not based on time. It's ways to batch emails together to deal with them in a bunch or a batch rather than one at a time as they happen to come in. Ways to slow down to increase efficiency. I know this seems like a paradox maybe or a contradiction, but there are some concrete ways that I found that by slowing down, you can actually increase your efficiency and decrease your stress levels in dealing with email. And then the last one I put for last because it's most challenging. It's the thing you have least control over, which is setting expectations for others. What I mean is educating the people you deal with, whether it be your clients or your colleagues or superiors, subordinates, about what your own email habits are so that you can do what you can to change their expectations about your email responsiveness and how you deal with email. And this can have really significant benefits, even though it's very challenging, and because it requires some cooperation or coordination with others, it's not something you can do solely on your own. So I'll start with the low-hanging fruit. And okay, first thing, I'm always surprised at how many people I find have email notifications turned on, meaning the notification that a new email has arrived. And I think it's because when you install Outlook or other email software, it's set up by default to notify you when new email arrives. And many people just never turn that off or don't know how to. And this is the first thing I suggest everyone do. I almost never say never or never say always, but on this one, I say always. There's no reason these days to have email notifications turned on. This was a feature back 20, 30 years ago when you might only get 2 or 3 emails in a day. It might be useful to get a notification when you got a new email because it was such an unusual occurrence. But if you're like me, you're getting a few hundred emails a day, of which maybe 100 are real, not spam emails or junk or newsletters. And there's just no reason to keep getting notified when they come in. So let me just step back for a second and say, in this webinar, I'm not going to be going through the specific technical instructions of how to take each of these steps in specific software programs like Outlook or Apple Mail. It would just take way too much time. And I want to keep this at a high level with tips that will apply to any device and any software. If you have questions about how to do these things, most of them you can find good instruction just by searching on Google for, if you have Outlook, how to turn off email notifications in Outlook, you'll find instructions. If you have a hard time finding instructions, email me. I'm rplotkin at blueshiftip.com. I'm glad to help you out. So turn off those email notifications. They will stop, turn off the sounds, turn off the little window popping up, any visual notification, turn them all off. If you have them coming up now, you'll see what a huge increase in focus you'll get as a result of this. Choose email, text, phone, etc. as appropriate. I still also find a lot of people, do you see a question? Email address again. I'm going to put it in the chat. Okay, and when I get emails from you, I will be applying my own tips to manage my productivity when I get emails from all of you in attendance. So I really do welcome it if you have questions. What do I mean by this? I find very often there's certain things that are just way more quick and efficient to do by phone than by email. But if I get in the habit of just doing everything by email, I can waste a lot of time and also create frustration for me and for people at the other end. For example, sometimes I'll start scheduling a meeting by email, but if there starts being a lot of back and forth about it, I'll pick up the phone and call someone, and we can quickly go over our calendars and eliminate a lot of the back and forth. A text I try to use for more urgent messages that need a quick response, and I ask other people to do the same. When you start using email for everything, no matter what the urgency is, no matter what the response deadline is, you can get into trouble by sucking up a lot of your own time and the time of other people. And I don't think there's any rule about this. I actually would say this is a place to apply mindfulness. See what works for you. If you find you're getting frustrated with an email chain, that might be a pointer to you, a red flag to you. Maybe I should use a different form of communication for this particular conversation. Same thing with phone. Sometimes you're talking by phone and you're trying to schedule something and you realize it's not working. Maybe you're in the car or the other person's in the car. Say, let's take this by email. A question came in. What are my thoughts about only accepting scheduled inbound phone calls? I do that. I do not take unscheduled phone calls from clients. And I have a receptionist. We actually at my firm use Ruby Receptionist, virtual receptionist service, pretty reasonably priced for small firms. And so that means no one calls me, no client calls me directly. I always have the call screened. I do not give my cell phone number to clients, which many people do. And I'll talk, if you feel anxious just thinking about doing these things and afraid, I'll talk about this element of it at the end of the talk. How do you deal with your own fear of the consequences of adopting some of these practices? Okay. Create an email filing system. I see a lot of people who their inbox just has hundreds or thousands of messages in it. This is a recipe for stress and for really low productivity. It doesn't really matter what filing system you come up with, as long as it is a filing system that works quickly for you to get things out of your inbox after you've dealt with them and only need to then store them long term. And I mentioned GTD, that's Getting Things Done, which is, I'm forgetting his name, Paul Allen maybe is a productivity guru. Doesn't matter what system you use. The thing is, if your inbox is just a large dumping ground for all kinds of emails that are have different statuses, you're going to spend so much time going through your inbox over and over again, looking at the subject lines of the same messages, tens or hundreds, trying to find things. You need a filing system, both to make it faster to get through your inbox and to make it easier to find stuff that you do need to find later, but only as long-term storage. And Anna actually mentioned to me when we were chatting before this, a pointer that I've been using for so long I forgot about, which is to set up rules to automatically move messages that don't need to be in your inbox at all. Mostly like email newsletters and other notifications of certain types from organizations. You can ease all of the email software out there, lets you set up rules to take that email as soon as it comes into your inbox and move it to a dedicated folder. And then I have a bunch of these set up like for newsletters that I read once a week or something like that. But I never have to see those emails in my inbox, and I never have to manually move them. I think there's another question coming in. Now I may apply some of my own filtering and batching here to apply to the chat messages coming, which I may just look at the chat messages after each slide, but I'll read this next question now. I use emails sometimes to have a written trail for communication. Would you suggest for those conversations that go better over phone to use an email after to sum up the conversation if a written trail is a necessity? Yeah, that's a really good idea. That's a really good idea. There's a lot of steps like this one that this questioner asked that take a little bit of extra time, but save a little bit of extra time up front, but that can be a little bit of a CYA for malpractice purposes and then save you a lot of time later. So I know sometimes people feel, oh, writing this summary email afterwards, it's going to take me 3 minutes. I don't have that time. Yeah, but think about how much time it saves you later and how much malpractice protection it gives you. And that's very often the case with these things that take a little bit of extra time up front. Okay, this is not about efficiency. This is more about stress reduction and malpractice protection, which is, you know, when you start typing an email address into Outlook or any other email software, it tries to save you time by automatically completing. Oh, I said auto-correction. I mean auto-completion. Auto-completing that email address. You've really got to be careful and stop and read every email address that you put into the to and the CC and the BCC before you hit send. I think I have done it a couple of times in my career when I have CC'd or added someone who was not the intended recipient. And you know, as lawyers, we're particularly high risk if you do that. There is some software out there that tries to spot this. I will just mention a company, which I think they only work with Microsoft products. And I have no financial affiliation with them. It's called Stands, S-T-A-N-D-S-S. I just put it in the chat. They have a bunch of really useful Outlook plugins. One of them, I believe, tries to find incorrect email addresses. So for example, if you've been emailing back and forth with a bunch of the same people, and then you add someone else to the list, it will spot that. But again, those software is perfect. So you really have to just pay attention for that one. All right, next topic, time blocking email. As I said, I'm going to apply this and I'll take the questions after I read this, but feel free to post them as I'm speaking. What does this mean? The basic idea is that you treat your reading and writing of email as a dedicated task that you allocate time to, not as something that you just do continuously throughout the day, not as something where you just, when an email comes in, you react to it. I know this can be really challenging for many reasons. It's a fairly natural reaction to want to respond to something. It triggers dopamine in our brains. It feels good to do it. Plus, there's a lot of fear about what happens if you're not being responsive enough to a client, but it can destroy your productivity if you are just responding to messages as they come in, and you can radically increase your productivity if you allocate time. What do I mean? Now, sometimes I say these things and people think I'm crazy, but I actually do these things. Put email checking or email time as an appointment on your calendar. I do this a few times throughout the day. I actually combine it a bit with the suggestions in the next email about batching, where I have dedicated time for responding to emails of a certain type. Like, because I'm running my own firm, I have to deal with some management issues, so I have accounting and bookkeeping related emails at a certain time of the day. And then you have to develop the discipline of sticking to that, which is two things. When that time comes up, you engage in that email checking, and only in that. You don't start doing other things, writing memos or doing other stuff. You're only focused on that. And you then don't check email outside of the scheduled time. It requires a lot of practice and discipline to do, and experimentation for yourself. You know, for some people, you might be able to schedule this for twice a day, for 30 minutes each. For other people, it might be 8 times a day for 10 minutes each, maybe different on different times a day. Experiment with what works for you and your practice. You don't have to do it as a calendar appointment necessarily. That may be infeasible, not feel good to you, but whatever you do, even if you don't schedule the time, the habit to get into is that, let's say I decide, oh, now I've got some time for email at some random time into the day. Still work on practicing the habit of, maybe even say to yourself, now I'm going to work on email. I'm not going to work on other things, and I'm just going to work on email for the next 20 minutes or until I get through this conversation, and then do your best to focus on only doing that during that block of time. It takes practice, and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, by which I mean, if you slip up and you do something else during this time period, don't beat yourself up. You'll still find you increase your productivity, even if you don't do it as much as if you were, quote, perfect at practicing this habit. Okay, now I will check for questions. So I just did that, right? I only worked on conveying the information in that slide to you while I was conveying that slide. And I didn't check for questions. Now that I'm done, I'm switching my mind into question checking mode. It's kind of the same thing I'm talking about. Question is, when you are just working on email during that block, if you get an email that reminds you of a task you need to do that isn't an email, should you take a moment to make a note of a to-do list and then continue checking the email? You know, I would say this is kind of a personal preference. I'd say experiment with this and see how that works for you. Personally, I wouldn't do that. You know, this may sound like overkill to you, but I have some of my email checking time during the day is what I've called miscellaneous email. It's for checking these random things that are coming into my inbox, the messages that aren't getting automatically moved by a rule, that don't get put into a category. And for me, I would check that kind of email you're talking about during one of those times, the kind of random miscellaneous email checking time. But do what works for you. Do what works for you. I'm going to keep saying it because I'm trying to give suggestions to you, not rules or dictates. These are things that have worked for me, but everyone's personality and work style is different. So I'm hoping to make these fairly gentle suggestions that you can try out and then tweak on your own by experimenting with them and see what works for you. Okay. One more, I did see one more question come in before I start on the next slide. If people know you as someone who replies to emails and calls all the time immediately, how do you eventually transition? I've got that covered in the final slide of this. It's hard, but it can be done, and I have done it. I have made that transition. And I'll just tell you, it wasn't as hard as I feared it would be. Skeptical. This is my break to say I'm wondering whether some of you out there have questions or concerns that you're not raising, because often when I tell people about these things, you know, they roll their eyes at me and say, I can't do this. It's not going to work for me. It's impossible. I'm too busy. I get too many. I've heard every reason, and there is validity to all of these concerns. You know, won't this take more time? So here's my basic response to this. Again, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you can, by adopting what I'm talking about 50% of the way or some of the time, I think you'll find you're still getting a gain over the current status quo that you're living with. If you're attending this webinar, it's probably because you find email is taking up way too much of your time, is being stressful, or both, and you need some solutions. So we're lawyers. Our minds tend to, and this is where my mindfulness practice comes into play, we're really good at raising these skeptical, critical questions, but sometimes we go into overdrive on them and focus more on the criticism or critique of what could go wrong than on the what could go right. So just be aware of that. If you have these concerns, I'm not saying dismiss them or that I'm dismissing them. I'm just saying see if you can try to balance this out with also thinking carefully about what gains could I get from these suggestions, what could work for me, and work on, adopt what works and don't adopt what doesn't work. And in terms of taking more time, some of these things do take some time to set up initially, like setting up rules to filter emails, setting up, I'll talk about categories, changing some of the settings in your email. All of these things take up time, but many of these are just a kind of a one-time setup. Some of the habits take some practice initially, but just like when you were a kid and you learned to brush your teeth, I'm sure it took you a while to get into that habit, but once you were in the habit, it didn't take more time to maintain the habit. You just did it. So keep that in mind. If you're finding some of this frustrating, it may take a little bit of practice and actually result in a short-term productivity decrease as you're working on developing the habit. But once it becomes automatic, that's when you start to see more of the productivity gain. Okay, batching email. What do I mean by this? This is any habit or technique you use to batch emails together so that you can go through them, whether reading, writing, responding to them in a more efficient way. You can do this by time. I've already talked about that. Scheduling time on your calendar, for example. You can do it by category. I'm just going to show you quickly. I have my Outlook up and I've set up some fake emails. I use categories. Outlook on the desktop does a really good job of this. I don't think the web-based Outlook does this as well, and I don't think Gmail does it as well. But I create categories in my inbox. So this is to segregate emails that still need to be dealt with. That's why they're in the inbox, but that I don't want to keep seeing mixed together with all of my other emails. So I just created some test emails, and you can see these are emails that I've assigned the test 1 category. So when these emails came into my inbox, I right-clicked on them, I put categorize, I assigned, test 1 to them, hit OK, and then by sorting my inbox by categories, that lets me see all of the emails that have been assigned the test 1 category together in a group. Whereas if I didn't group them this way, you would see these emails, these test 2 emails, all of them in a row chronologically in the inbox, and it would be a mess. So these are fake categories that I've created just for this webinar, test 1, test 2, and test 3. So you don't see any confidential emails of mine, but you can see I've got accounting emails, I've got marketing, I actually have 1, 2, and 3 to do next. You don't see any 2 or 3 because I don't have any assigned to those categories at the moment. But that's one way I prioritize emails to read and deal with after they come into my inbox. If something's really high priority, I put it into to do next. You can also reassign things in Outlook really nicely. I'm going to take this test 3 and move it into test 2, and now it's in that category. I'm not going to open up this none because that's my true real email inbox, but if I open that up, that would be all of the uncategorized new emails that have arrived into my inbox. So that none category is nice. It lets me see which emails I need to categorize or read. And so my habit during my miscellaneous email time is to go through this none category. And I have a basic rule. If I can respond to something within, let's say, 30 seconds or less, I respond to it and then file it away. If it's going to take more than that, I put it into a category and then I deal with that later at the category time. So that's categories. Gmail has tags or similar tags or labels. Different software calls it different things. You can batch things by conversation. That's really helpful. I mean, how many times have you had 30 emails in one conversation? If you view emails in your inbox by conversation, you can see all of them. Very often, if there's 20 emails in a conversation, you really only need to read the most recent one or briefly skim the others and just respond to the most recent one. Whereas if those emails in the same conversation are just interspersed throughout your inbox, it can take forever to respond to them. You can batch things by recipient. That's a good one. You can batch them by your matter or project number. And, you know, it may seem obvious, but why is it more efficient? There's many reasons why it's more efficient. Psychologically, if you're looking at emails in a certain conversation, you've got the information about the client or that case or that conversation at the top of your mind in your short-term memory. So you can process those mentally much more quickly if you do them all at once than if you're switching back and forth. Your brain has to what's called switch contexts. And every time you do that, it takes a little bit of time to do. So I really, really recommend batching, and you can combine the batching with the time blocking to do your batches at a certain time. And I'm telling you, I just crank through emails this way. You can use, I've talked about these already, use technology to assist, categories, tags. I said attachments, which is the calendar. If you have an appointment for checking emails, you can actually, in Outlook at least, you can drag emails into that calendar appointment. They become attachments. It's getting a little complicated. And I see I'm kind of at time. So let me see if anyone has questions. I'm almost there. No questions? So, okay, almost there on this one. Slowing down to increase efficiency. What do I mean by this? The basic idea is that we might naturally think that by responding to emails as quickly as possible, we're increasing our efficiency. The problem is when you respond quickly, you're more likely to overlook information in an email and not respond to it, which is going to cause the client or other person to respond back to you and ask you for more information. You're more likely to make mistakes. And that's going to cause problems. It's going to take more time because you're going to have to fix the mistake, and it may cause malpractice problems, client relation problems, other relational problems. So sometimes by pausing just a little bit before hitting send, checking all your recipients, making sure you haven't left anyone out and you haven't added someone who shouldn't be there, and doing a quick take a breath, read the email, make sure it says what you want to say. It takes a little bit more time, but can actually increase your overall efficiency by decreasing the number of follow-up emails you need to send or respond to. I just said proofread. But again, this feels like a paradox or a contradiction. So also reduces stress. I mean, if you've ever sent an email, let's say to the wrong person, or I don't know, with some error that was embarrassing for some reason, or a cut and paste that you shouldn't have put in there from another email. It's embarrassing, it's stressful. And then the fear that you might have done that is stressful. So all of this with a little bit of time and pausing can really decrease your stress level. There are also plugins. In Gmail, you can schedule a send or pause the send so that when you hit send, the email doesn't actually go out for, I think, 30 seconds and stands. That email plugin company I mentioned, I believe, I don't use it, but I believe they have a delay or pause email plugin where when you hit send, the email doesn't actually go out for a little while. It's kind of a little protection in case you hit send and then 20 seconds later think, oh no, there was something I should have said or shouldn't have said. You can still catch the email before it goes out. All right. I'll check one more time for questions. Okay, how do you manage large files that take up space in your inbox but that you need to keep? So if I'm understanding the question, this is how do you do long-term email storage with large files? I've got to say, so I'm a computer scientist by training. I've been using email for like 30 years. I am shocked at how hard it is to find a good solution for this long-term email storage of large files. In my firm, we're using Microsoft, Outlook, Office 365, and I was shocked that there's no good, particularly shared long-term email storage solution. We ended up using SharePoint, which is a Microsoft product. And how do you purchase a third-party piece of software to make it easier to move emails from the inbox in Outlook into SharePoint and then view them easily from SharePoint? Because although Outlook is a Microsoft product and SharePoint's a Microsoft product, they don't naturally talk to each other easily. But that's what we've ended up using is SharePoint for long-term email storage with large attachments. And then it means we can also share them. If I save an email, my partner and paralegal and other people can see them. If you're using Gmail or G Suite, I'm not sure what the answer is to that. I think there may be an answer. And with Apple or Mac, I'm not sure what the answer is either. Unfortunately, and shocking, it's 2020 and we're still in that situation. Next question, you might want to remind people about pausing before sending vis-a-vis email or texting. Yeah, same thing, whatever you do. Texting, it's so much more natural to just text and hit send immediately. It takes more practice. And again, this relates to my background in mindfulness. You really need to practice. It's such a reflexive habit to type or dictate and hit send immediately. To break that habit may sound silly. I suggest, and I've done this, I've actually taught this, practice sending a text to yourself or to your partner or someone else who doesn't mind getting, fake text from you. Practice typing out a text and then pulling your finger away and taking one deep breath. Thinking about what you're going to send and then hitting send. I say and do that 10 times in a row and do it every day 10 times in a row until it becomes a habit. Why? Because we're so wired to do it. You're going to keep hitting send immediately unless you actually practice this as a habit. Can I sort or batch a sent email by client automatically? If so, how? I may take this offline, but yes. And the SharePoint that we use can do it. This third-party software we bought is called One Place Mail. There's a few of them. There's also Stands. I mean, I sound like I'm a spokesman for Stands, but again, I have no affiliation with them. STANDSS. If you're using Outlook, they have a plugin called QuickFile, which lets you easily move things to folders, including on send. So when you hit send and QuickFile is installed in Outlook, it pops up a little window with choices of email folders to save the email into. And then when you hit send, it both sends the email and automatically copies the email into your folder that you selected. And it's quite smart in that it remembers where you've saved emails to certain recipients. So the next time you send an email to the same recipient, it will pop up that same folder as a suggestion for you, so it saves you time. It's a bunch of ways to do it. So I'd suggest checking that out, and if you use SharePoint or something else, One Place Mail, and there's some other products that do similar thing. You think, oh, just one step. After I send it, I just have to copy the sent mail. But if you have to do that for a couple of hundred emails a day, just cutting out that extra step and automating it is a huge time saver. Okay, time's running out. Thank you, Anna. The last step is really social. People have asked this question a few times about changing their habits and then changing expectations. The basic idea is to let others know about your new habits. You don't have to give them a lecture about it. But there are certain basic things to do, which is just to tell people, I'm only checking email a few times a day now. If you don't get a response from me right away, know that I'm paying attention, but I'm not going to respond immediately. You can put it in your email signature. I respond to email. I check emails at 9, 1, and 5 or something, or whatever your pattern happens to be. You can set up an autoresponder, which says I'm busy now and respond later. Actually, on an iPhone, you can do this in Do Not Disturb while driving. It sends people, if they text you, it sends a response saying, Robert is driving now. He'll respond to you when he gets to his location. I put this Inbox When Ready as a plugin for Gmail, which tells people that you're using Inbox When Ready and not checking your email constantly. It takes time. I found the biggest impediment to this was my own fear, that clients would go hire another lawyer or they wouldn't use me and I found all of those were unfounded. I was really pleasantly surprised at how accommodating people were for this new habit, and it really didn't affect my relations with clients or anyone else at all. And I do sometimes give people a backup. If you need to reach me urgently, call, and tell the receptionist. For me, it's a receptionist. You may want to give certain people a backup method of getting in touch with you immediately. And Anna just said Android too. So I guess that means Android has something similar for do not disturb or do not disturb while driving. I know people who have put on their do not disturb while driving permanently, just to have that auto response message telling people, I've received your text, but I'm not going to respond to it immediately. So yeah, again, I think the main impediment for setting the new expectations is going to be your own fear. Look, as lawyers, it's highly competitive environment. We have to be responsive to clients, but question how real, and test it out. Test out your new practice. Tell people what your new habits are, and then see if your fears really come to pass. And do it maybe with a few people to start with, and that might ease your fear and make it easier to ease into. Okay, I know I went a little bit over time. I wanted to make it as complete as possible. I've kind of raced through this, but if anyone has other questions, feel free to post them now. I know I said to one person, you know, I'll take more of your answer offline. Please do feel free to email me, rplotkin@blueshiftip.com. And I could really only touch the surface here. It's kind of the tip of the iceberg. Email is so pervasive. There's lots of other things I do that I haven't mentioned. So if you have questions, let me know. And I'm glad to do another one of these. If there's enough questions about things I haven't touched on, that's worth another webinar. Thanks so very much, everybody.
Well, thanks for that excellent presentation, Robert. You gave attendees a lot to think about and some interesting new practices to attempt. And I'll just say I have a 24-hour rule. If there's any kind of emotional charge to an email or a message that I'm going to send, if I'm angry or confused or if it's important, I will, one, wait 24 hours. We have a drafts folder for a reason. And two, I have 2 or 3 trusted people who I will ask to read it and give me feedback. All the best writers have good editors. So thank you for those excellent tips. Thank you all for joining us. Recordings and slides will be available on our website at www.masslomap.org. Thanks for tuning in, and please mark your calendars for September 16th when Alison Shields will be presenting on the topic of developing your LinkedIn action plan. And thanks all for tuning in. Have a delightful afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, Anna.
Thanks, everybody.